So we're picking back up, doing our journalizing. I think that was the only journal entry we made, right? Was to actually purchase the fiberglass. Why is it doing that? That's going to be irritating. Sorry, I think I'm going to need to recalibrate this again. Okay, I'm going to read the next journal entry so you can write it down while I'm doing this. So the next journal entry says, I issued $18,000 in materials to the job. I issued $18,000 worth of materials to the job. 10/12. Just a sec, not quite done. 14,500 was fiberglass. 3,500 was gaskets and rings. Yeah. I issued 18 grand in materials to the job for I'm making 30 segways for the University of Oklahoma. 14.5 of that was the fiberglass bodies. The other 3,500 were gaskets and O-rings and all those sort of ancillary pieces. So I've got 2 debits. Part of it goes directly into what account? Yes, work in process. You need to figure out where the other $3,500 goes, and we looked at that on Friday. So you're going to have 2 debits and a credit. So just think about it on your own. And where does that $18,000 worth of materials come out of? It's all sitting in here, isn't it? In my current asset account. So it's coming out of there and being issued into the job. I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah, just wanted to clarify, when you bought the gaskets and the O-rings, those went into raw materials inventory, certainly. I buy those in big batches, just like I do the fiberglass bodies, right? I try and get some sort of volume discount. So the 18 grand of materials that I took out of my current asset account called raw materials inventory, 14,500 of it is what we would call what? Direct materials, because they're easily traceable. One fiberglass body, one Segway. So direct materials goes into WIP. Where do the O-rings and the gasket and the powder coating and the screws and the washers and all those sorts of things go? Those are elements of manufacturing overhead. Goes right in, they are indirect material, and it goes right into our manufacturing overhead account. Let's do a quick review here. Jake, what kind of account is manufacturing overhead? Debit type or credit type? It's neither. Why? Yeah, it's a temporary account. It's got to be closed out. It's not a P&L account. It's not a balance sheet account. It's not a debit account. It's not a credit account. It's a temporary account we use to facilitate. What does that mean? What kinds of things am I going to see on the debit side of manufacturing overhead? What just happened right here that was on the debit side? Yep, all my actual stuff. Indirect material, indirect labor, property tax bill for the year, monthly depreciation. And these are all going to have different credits, aren't they? Like for this one, the credit was raw materials inventory. For indirect labor, the credit's going to be salaries payable. For factory taxes, the credit's going to be AP. For depreciation, the credit's going to be accumulated depreciation. All my elements of actual overhead. What goes on the credit side then? And I apply overhead based on a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. Is that, when do I do my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Yeah, ahead of time, right? It's an estimate. And then I use that rate to apply overhead to different jobs. Are these going to equal out?
No.
No?
Sometimes it can, sometimes it won't.
Yeah, probably never.
So,
One side's going to be bigger than the other. And I think I actually erroneously told you, we're going to close that amount into COGS. And I think I told you something else. I don't know what I told you.
You stop us at that with the example.
Okay. So my point being on this guy, why did I debit manufacturing overhead for my indirect materials? Because what? Explain why. Huh? It's not traceable exactly, but the reason I debited overhead is it's an example of actual overhead. And all my actual overhead goes on the debit side, and all my applied overhead goes on the credit side. And if you struggle remembering that, just think about alphabetizing it. Actual comes before applied, doesn't it? Actual left, applied right. Okay. Oh, I need to tell you one other thing too. Woo! Tracers. I need to tell you one other thing too that I think, or that I know that I haven't. Is there one big, huge WIP account? So I'm making, 50 batches of Segways concurrently. Is there one big WIP account for all these? You've got to have individual, and what's that called? Like AP and AR have what? They're control accounts with subsidiaries, right? I don't just have one big AP number when I've got 800 vendors. So my WIP is the control account. What kind of account is WIP again? Current asset, good. And it's got all sorts of little baby accounts under it, doesn't it? University of Oklahoma, University of Montana, MSU, Washington State, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those little WIP accounts are accumulating the cost for that job. And so remind me, I think we're working on University of Oklahoma here. What are my debits going to be in my little mini WIP account or my subsidiary again? Actual. What's this? What's that 14.5? Actual direct materials What else? Actual direct labor. And what else? What kind? Not actual. Applied overhead. Why is it not actual? Why do I not have the actual overhead in the University of Oklahoma account? It fluctuates. It fluctuates. I got a $10,000 property tax bill this month. Do I absorb that all in my 30 segues to University of Oklahoma? Heck no. I need to spread that out all over the year, don't I? That's why we have this rate. And each of these are going to have the same. Actual direct materials, actual direct labor, and applied overhead. And when you add all the subsidiaries up, they got a balance here, just like AP and AR. Okay, next transaction. I'm running payroll. This is way more complicated than I'm actually going to make it look, but because you've got obviously all the liabilities for all the taxes. But let's just keep her easy, and I'm just going to give you the gross numbers. So for my payroll, my assembly is $65.83. My supervisor is $16.39. Factory supervisor is $16.39. And my admin staff is $8,000. So I'm running my semi-monthly payroll. Here's my gross checks. People on my assembly line, $65.83. And all I'm working on is this University of Oklahoma job. I was just making up the part where I said I had 30 jobs. My factory supervisor's gross is $16.39, and my admin is $8,000. You're going to have 3 debits and 1 credit. Semi-monthly payroll, so I'm on 1015. Go ahead.
You're still on the one with the line.
Yeah. Date, description, debit, credit. Yep.
So the factory supervisor is credit.
No.
So he's still in the debit part.
These are the gross wages for these 3 categories of workers. And they're going to go into 3 different accounts. Okay, let's just talk in general about what these are. Who are the assembly workers? How would you describe them? They are direct labor. And we know where direct labor goes. It goes right into what account?
Work in progress.
WIP. Factory supervisor is an example of an indirect labor. And indirect labor is an element of manufacturing overhead. And in my mind, I can just do a quick scan. And say, okay, that's actual overhead. And does actual overhead belong on the debit or credit side of overhead?
You're simply either which is your budget, right?
Sorry.
Which is the
Does the indirect labor go on the debit or credit side of my manufacturing overhead account? Why? Yeah, actual always goes on the debit side. Applied goes on the credit side. So that makes sense that my actual overhead went on the debit side. What do I do with this? Is there anything different from what we've always done with administrative expenses? Is it a period or product cost? Period. Just goes straight to my P&L. If these were sales salaries, it would be sales payroll expense. If they were marketing salaries, marketing payroll expense. The key here is that you show me which word. That means it goes straight where? P&L. Very good. What am I going to credit?
Salary and wages payable.
Yeah, salaries payable. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all the taxes here. That gets pretty complicated. What's my number?
16,222.
16 something.
222.
But I knew it wasn't 30 grand. I looked at Gretchen and I'm like, My estimating skills let me look here and see this wasn't 30 grand. Okay, next transaction. During the month, I had the following bills. Costs. Depreciation on my factory equipment was $1,800. Taxes on my factory, $310. Utilities on my factory, $39.40. Depreciation on my factory, $1,800. Taxes on my factory, $310. Utilities on my factory, $39.40. And in the business world, we always assume that our actual invoices, which the taxes and utility are, come in and we book them as what? Do we pay cash the minute they come in the door? No, so therefore they go into what? Liability, AP. But obviously I'm not writing a check for the depreciation, so the credit for that is different. And we can just go ahead and use a 10/31 date for that because they come in all over the month. Two debits and a credit. No, two debits, two credits, excuse me. No, that's actually not true. One debit, two credits. back road, Jess. What am I debiting?
For the accumulated depreciation, I debited accumulated depreciation and then credited factory depreciation.
No. Let's back up a second.
Okay. And then,
Just a sec. These are all elements, hon. If you were going to describe this to me, you'd say, these are all examples of what? Manufacturing overhead. Actual or applied? Actual. These are all examples of actual manufacturing overhead. What do we do with actual manufacturing overhead? We debit manufacturing overhead. And how do I know that? Because actual goes on the debit side, right? And applied goes on the credit side. And so far in here we have two things, right? Indirect materials and indirect labor on the actual side. Now we're adding another $6,050. Because that's what these guys total to. What are my credits to?
Accounts payable and accumulated depreciation.
Whenever I get in invoices that I'm going to pay, I run them through my AP system. Am I writing a check for all three of these things?
No.
No, just for the second and the third one, right? And those come to
4250.
4250. Whenever you see this word, what's your credit?
Accumulated depreciation.
Accumulated depreciation, which goes on which financial statement?
Balance sheet.
Goes on your balance sheet as a what?
Credit to depreciation.
It's not a liability. Contra asset. Very good. That was tricky. Well, actually not tricky, just you probably haven't thought about it for a while. Okay. I want you to set up your manufacturing overhead account and plug in the numbers that we have on the debit side so far. In other words, post them from your journal entries to the T account.
We'll just do it.
You can do it wherever you want. We're going to post into our manufacturing overhead account. I think we've got a couple entries now. Okay, and then tally that up and figure out what your debit balance is. So, okay, I've got my manufacturing overhead. I've got all my items from actual posted in there. Now, just before you read this, just bear with me. Let me tell you what's happening. So I've requisitioned all the materials. I've done all of the labor on it. And I'm ready to transfer the job out of WIP. It's done. So what do I still have to do before I can transfer it out of WIP? It's got all its direct materials, all its direct labor. I need to apply manufacturing overhead. I can't take this, whatever that is, 15-some thousand dollars, straight to that little job for University of Oklahoma, can I? What do I have to do? Are those numbers right? No, 1639. Sorry, I thought that looked high.
11,180.
I can't put all 11 grand right into my University of Oklahoma job, can I? What do I have to do? I have to apply overhead. So you have to ask me, what's the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? And I have to tell you. Can I just tell you it's 98 cents?
No.
No, 98 cents per what? Well, not per job, or you'd only be putting 98 cents in there.
Whatever the expiration is.
Some sort of activity base or activity driver is what I called it, yes. And in this case, I think that manufacturing overhead is driven by direct labor dollars. And I am applying overhead to my job at the rate of 98 cents per direct labor dollar. What am I going to debit and what am I going to credit? What do I need to get that applied overhead into?
Finished goods.
Not quite yet.
Work in progress.
Work in process. Then we're going to move it all together into finished goods. So I've got to get it into WIP. And where does my credit for manufacturing overhead that's applied go? I showed you this. What account does it go into?
What are you asking?
Where does applied manufacturing overhead get credited to? Sitting right in front of you. Manufacturing overhead. Ah, geez, right here. So what are you going to debit? What are you going to credit? You're going to debit
And Emily.
Work in progress.
WIP, and you're going to credit
Manufacturing.
manufacturing overhead. And all you need to do is figure out 98 cents per direct labor dollar on this job. And I'm transferring the job on the 30th. It's not hours, it's based on direct labor dollars.
Ah, there we go.
Now, next step. Figure out how much is in my WIP account, because what am I going to do now that my segues are done? I'm going to move them into my finished goods inventory. So you better set up a what? How are you going to figure out how much is in there? What do we set up to use for a tool?
T account.
Yeah, set up a T account for your WIP and tell me how much is in there and then transfer it. $14,500 plus $65.83 plus $64.51. Actual direct materials plus actual direct labor plus applied manufacturing overhead. And you're going to always have all three of those things before you transfer it, aren't you? Your job's not complete until you have actual materials plus actual labor plus applied overhead. What has this done to your balance sheet? Not quite there yet. My question is, what did this transaction do to your balance sheet? Who said that? Somebody say something. What did it do? Nothing. It did nothing. You swapped one current asset for another. These are both current assets. Did nothing. Just moved it from WIP into finished goods. I thought I heard somebody whisper, Disney. I heard it. So let me just say something out loud. There's no stupid answers. And when I put a wrong number up here, instead of everyone going, what the hell did that, where did that come from? Go like, Lisa, you wrote the wrong number in the T account. Okay? I am just like y'all. Plenty of mistakes as the days roll on. Okay. Now, so did everybody get 27,534?
Yes.
What's going to happen next?
Oklahoma State's gonna pay you.
I sincerely hope that I can invoice them and ship the Segways, right? You have to ask me one question, and I will tell you you've got 2 journal entries to book the sale, just like you did back in Accounting 101. What do you have to ask me? How much did you bid? 41,180. I sold them for $41,180. You have got 2 journal entries, just like you did in Tim's class the 5th week of Accounting 101. You got to get these guys out of finished goods inventory, and you got to book the sale. $41,180. 2 journal entries. And then I also need,
Is that on 1031?
yeah. I need you to calculate the unit cost of my 30 Segways after you've booked the journal entries. And I want to know what my gross profit percentage is. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to finish this off. And no, you're not allowed to drop the 3rd week of class.
I'm ready. Can we start drinking?
That's encouraged. No. Where are you moving the finished goods inventory to? The P&L. And then you got to book the sale, just like you did anytime you sell something on account. And I sold 30 of these things. So when you go to do the unit cost, there's 30 Segways. Move it out of my inventory onto my P&L. Debit or credit? Really? This one was revenue. What's my debit when I sell something on account, Jordan? Yeah. You know that you've got to have 2 journal entries when you sell something. One to pull the asset off of your balance sheet and run it through the P&L as an expense, and the other to book the sale. I sold 30 of these things. What's the unit cost on them?
$1,251.
That doesn't feel quite.
27.
Oh, no, no, no. What? Say that again. What's your number? Yeah, yeah.
$1,251.13.
I agree. How much they cost me to make? How many of them were there? How much did I sell each of them for?
$1,372.
I think is that right?
80 divided by 40.
How much?
173.
1373?
Yeah.
Boy, I didn't make much on them. What's my gross profit percentage? Less than 10%. How much is it? My cost divided by 30 segways?
918.
Yeah, I'm getting 917.
917.8.
Okay. Did somebody else get a different cost number?
918.
Okay, sorry. 918 what?
918.
Oh, 917.80.
Then my gross profit's going to be over 10%. Maybe I need to get my calculator. Pretty much. My gross profit in total was 13,646, and I divide that into my revenue. Anybody else get 33%? So what is gross profit, Sherry? What minus what? Exactly. So I took sales minus COGS. And I want to know it as a percentage of what? My revenue. Yeah. Do I have a second on the 33% number? I'll second that. I got it right there. This stuff right in here is all review. There's nothing new in there. The last thing I need to do, and you guys can go back and listen to this, I'm going to post it, is I got to close out my manufacturing overhead account. What's my credit in here for the applied? How much was it? $64.51. So am I even close? No. Have I under applied or over applied? Under by how much? Under applied by how much? 47.38. You got two options. Well, first let me just ask, can I just leave this? No, I've got to zero it out because we know it's a temporary account. You have two options. If it's a small number, you can take it straight to COGS.
Consider this small number.
If it's so immaterial that it's not going to impact any decisions. And what do I mean by that? How am I going to close this out then? Debit it or credit it for the 47.38? Credit it and debit COGS. If it's material, you split it pro rata between COGS, WIP, and finished goods. Pro rata meaning you add up all these, that's your denominator, and then each of them is a ratio of 1 to the total.
What's that about material?
Immaterial. For Wednesday, I need you to please, if you haven't yet, read the chapter, and I'm going to have you go through another one just like this on page 109. It's the review. So it's going to take you through all the journal entries just like we did. Obviously, you should do that as much as possible.